This is a Tedoex Media House production.
Okay, so welcome, Abdullahi. Really excited to have you here. So maybe could you give us a brief overview about yourself and the work that you do for our audience?
Yeah, thank you so much, Desnor. My name is Abdullahi Tsanni, and I am based here in Abuja, Nigeria, and I work as a freelance science journalist. And I have some of my stories and reports have appeared in a couple of science-focused media publications, including Nature, the Genetic Literacy Project, and Nigeria Health Watch, African News Page, and others. I also work voluntarily for Science Communication Hub Nigeria. It's actually an online community of scientists and journalists, coming together in order to work towards promoting the public understanding of science and kind of trying to enhance the visibility of scientists and their works in Nigeria. I'm pretty passionate about science writing and science communication, and it's all started back then while I was in school, and I was just writing without and without much expectation about anything. But actually, I have a background. I did my undergraduate degree in biochemistry, so I have a science background. But I later discovered that I was more passionate about communicating the science rather than doing the science in the lab. So I started writing voluntarily for Science Communication Hub Nigeria, and I volunteered for some few activities, and that's how I just started. And here am I today.
Oh, that's amazing. So what platforms do you guys usually use for the science communication?
Yes. Most of the work that we have done, most of the write-ups and maybe videos and um, webinars usually happen online. So we have a website, www.scicomnigeria.org. There we have all the articles, and we also have a database of scientists and journalists. So if you are looking for a scientist in a particular field, we have a database of scientists that you can reach out to them with questions or whatever you have. And we also have the journalists as well. If maybe you are a scientist and you're looking for a journalist who has experience in reporting science, so you can also reach out to them. Then we also do a couple of radio programs whereby we try to engage with the public, and we have done a couple of them in local languages, particularly Hausa language, which is predominantly spoken in the northern part of Nigeria. Yes.
That's amazing. Do you know of any other efforts across the continent that are doing the same, or?
Yes. After starting Science Communication of Nigeria, Science Communication of Nigeria was actually founded by Mahmoud Bukar Maina. He's a neuroscientist. He's based at the University of Sussex in UK. But he's a Nigerian, so he founded SciComm Nigeria in 2017, and I volunteered, and we all started working together. So as a result of that, the project, grew bigger, and we had to start looking for partnerships. And so along the line, we secured a grant a Welcome Trust grant through we have what we call the non-profit Trend in Africa, teaching and research in natural sciences for development in Africa. So we got this grant of about £1,000, £100,000, and so we launched a project last year in October called the African Science Literacy Network. So what we did is we trained about 70 scientists and journalists in Nigeria from the different regions of Nigeria. Nigeria is quite big, so we trained about 70 scientists and journalists on science communication and science journalism. We picked around, and we have journalists from all the platforms, print, online, and the broadcast, and also have the scientists from several universities across Nigeria. So we train them, and it is a partnership between the scientists and the journalists so that they can produce more science stories and also kind of promote better understanding of science. So that is that. And I think at the moment in Africa also another very important platform that is also doing something great is the Africa Archive. It is pronounced Africa Archive, but
I just came across it.
Great, you got the. So at the moment we are also building a partnership, and we've initiated the partnership already, and very soon, in fact, we are just working on a blog, an article that we are going to publish very soon about the partnership between the African Science Literacy Network and the Africa Archive. So what we are trying to do is, because the Africa Archive, it's a preprint repository for African scientists and even non-African scientists as well to publish their works. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to address the issues of science literacy through open access, right?
Yes, that's a big.
So because there are a lot of researches but this research are supposed to make impact, but you find out this research are behind paywalls, right?
Yes.
So we're trying to use the open access principles and to make sure that these things are open for everyone so that people can access them. And most importantly, the work of Africa Archive, I think, is very important, because what they try to do, for example, under the partnership that we have now, we want to make sure that while this research are being published, free of cost, we also want to have people that will translate them.
Yes.
Because, as you know, Africa is linguistically diverse. A lot of, in Nigeria, for example, we have over 500 languages. So you can imagine. So, and that is the whole point of the thing, because you produce a research which is very important, and but people, it can't make much impact because people can't translate that research. Yeah. So we need people that can do that. So we're bringing our journalists so that they can be able to translate and break down these, including the scientists as well. They work together to translate these articles and these papers. And even on the website, the Africa Archive website, I think they also produce a lot of videos, particularly with the pandemic, videos in different languages, different African languages, Swahili, and even the Nigerian languages, many languages actually, and I think it's great.
So with African Archive, here there's the Bio Archive and the Chem Archive. Is there any division or compartmentalization of the different disciplines, or it's just one big repository?
Oh, I think it's a big repository, but I think they publish according to these fields.
Okay.
Yes. They publish them.
So what role do you think that scientists and science communicators have in shaping public policy or, helping to manage COVID-19?
Yeah, I think it's we science communicators and scientists. definitely have a critical role to play in this regards. I have highlighted some of the issues in my most in the recent article that I wrote. But most importantly, what I want to highlight here is that, for example, when we talk about science literacy, what are we really talking about? And when we talk about science literacy, this refers to the range of skills and competencies that one needs to have in order to be able to, source for information. And when you source the information, you have to be able to comprehend it, evaluate it, and make use of it, including scientific knowledge. So when you look, you will find out that in Africa, science literacy is really poor, including health literacy. Science literacy is related to health literacy because and so the level of science literacy in Africa is poor. Is poor at the moment, and we really need people need this local knowledge of science for them to be able to take actions against the development issues that we are currently facing, including the pandemic. For example, when you talk about loss of biodiversity, you talk about climate change.
Yes.
When people don't understand what these things are, when people don't understand the science, how does loss of biodiversity affect them? How does climate change affect them? When people don't understand these things, there is no how they can involve themselves and take action against it. And I think that is one of the problems that we are having. For example, in Nigeria, the cases of COVID-19 are increasing daily. We have over 17,000 cases at the moment. But the government has eased the curfew and the lockdown. But and the government, even though the government said, okay, look, everyone has to wear the masks and you have to respect social distancing. But now what this means is that the responsibility is shifting more to the public, right? But when you look around, you see that people are not adhering to these instructions. People are just moving around doing their things. And I think one of the causes of that is because people have a poor understanding of people have a poor science literacy, because if you really understand that, if you understand what the virus is all about, you understand why the WHO is saying that people should observe social distancing and wash their hands and use the masks as well.
Yes.
I think that people will take responsibility and make sure that they obey the laws or the rules at the moment. But unfortunately, a lot of people are not doing that. A lot of people are not doing that. People want to go to church, people want to go to the markets, people want to go to the restaurants and eat.
Yeah.
So we really have a critical role to play in terms of communicating, and sharing and involving ourselves in public engagement and knowledge sharing at the local level. I mean, both in formal and informal settings.
Yes.
People really need science education, and there is no how we can achieve that. I mean, the scientists have to engage the public themselves, and also with the help of the science communicators and the science journalists as well.
To your point about, we don't have great science literacy, and you've also raised the challenges with access to the vocabulary, right? As we're learning science, it's always in English, and so the challenge is not everyone, even when people understand English, there are things that you really need to hear in your native language for it to make a lot of sense. Something I was thinking about, though, is in our languages, we don't have the same vocabulary as in English. And when I think about it in the context of, for example, AIDS and HIV, when in English, HIV and AIDS stand alone. When you break down what each acronym actually means, basically informs you what the disease is about. But in our languages, how do we translate that? Because I think about I'm Shauna, right? And so in our language, when they're describing when someone has HIV or AIDS, they will say kondombera. But then if we had to translate what that means, there's no real translation for it.
Yes.
And I was thinking about how that hampers efforts to explain COVID, right? Like, would you explain that it's a flu, but it's a serious flu? So how is it different from the flu when we're trying to use our own language? So those barriers make it incredibly challenging even for scientists to then start to explain just how serious or the gravity of the pandemic or what symptoms to look for, because a lot of them are pretty similar to diseases that are already available. So how do we then work on distinguishing that?
Yes, I think that the issue of the vocabulary in science communication, it's really a serious issue. Like you just gave the example of the HIV and AIDS, and there are many examples. For example, how do you say fossils in the local language? How do you say gene? How do you say cell in the local language?
Yes.
And these are some of the basic terms that we need to explain some of these phenomena that we are currently facing, like with the coronavirus. And I think for me, I have managed as much as possible to work with a scientist here in Nigeria, and also we worked with the people in the languages department, like the Hausa department at Ahmadu Bello University Zaria. So we try to get in touch with these people and sit down, look at these terms. Okay, how best can we explain the term cell or the term COVID-19?
Yes.
The COVID-19. How do we put it best? So in Hausa, because when you look at the recent article that I did, I also did a short infographic in Hausa that trying to explain the hand washing and the social distancing. So the scientists and the people from the languages department, they were able to come up with, they coined the term for COVID-19. They call it Murar Mashako. That is in Hausa, because it's like you said, it's COVID-19 is like it's a flu-like disease, right? So the term Mura actually means like flu. So, but then they added the other term Mashako, which has to do with any disease that leads to the flu-like symptoms. So I think that there's really a huge knowledge gap. So we really have to think of how can we bridge that gap. And maybe I think that the adults, can we have like a toolbox of some of these terms, have like a toolbox of some of these terms in our science education curriculum, right? And at the same time, it doesn't just because some people are already adults, for example. So we need to have like a lifelong learning opportunities provide great lifelong learning opportunities for people to learn about science and science literacy. So if we can have like a toolbox of these terms, telling us, explaining some of these basic terms in science, I think that is really going to help. But unfortunately, at the same time, the issue is, for example, when you look at the media reportage of science, it's really poor. The media houses are not interested in reporting about science.
Yes.
And yes, for example, in Nigeria, you hardly find any dedicated media platform that reports about science. You hardly find that. You have very few in Africa. So the channel of communication, it's we need to increase the channels of communication to reach out to the people. And with regards to the COVID-19, I think that governments, both national and state levels, at all levels, I'm happy that for Nigeria, for example, the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, which is the nation's public health institute that is responsible for preparedness, detection, and responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, has actually recognized this gap, and they are working towards producing, some of these informational articles in the languages that people understand, and they are just putting them to the people in the states.
So in Nigeria, it seems that there is some effort to engage scientists in
Yes.
policy making. I don't think that's always true for a lot of governments. I'm wondering, do you guys also have, of the challenges that you face as science communication and some science communicators outside of the language background, do you ever meet pushback, from a cultural perspective, perhaps that what you're trying to share is just, it's not for our people?
Yes. In fact, with the work that we are doing at the moment, the pushback from the cultural perspective is also one of the major challenges that you face, coupled with religion as well. So you face these challenges, and I will say that people really need to listen to the facts. What are the facts saying, and what is the science saying? But unfortunately, you find people that don't even believe in science, and that is why you have a lot of conspiracy theories. People saying that, oh, this virus was engineered to depopulate a certain region or a certain group of people, So
Yes.
we have this misinformation circulating, and it depends, the type of misinformation that circulates, you see that also depends on the same level of literacy, either health literacy, science literacy, or literacy levels in general. For example, in the northern, we have the northern, Nigeria is largely divided into two. We have the northern and the southern part of Nigeria. Like in the northern part of Nigeria, you have largely Muslims, and in the southern part of Nigeria, you have a largely Christian population. And the truth is, when you look at the statistics with regards to literacy levels, the southern part of the country is, is much more higher than in the northern part of the country. So when you are in a community whereby people have a certain level of literacy, so it becomes easier to communicate some of these issues. But when you find yourself in a community whereby the literacy levels are very, very low, it's really difficult, and you will definitely face these challenges. People will tell you that, oh, I believe in God, and this infection, this disease cannot get to me at all. So,
those are big on WhatsApp chain messages.
Yes.
Speaking of which, I've noticed that primarily for myself and other researchers, we use Twitter to do the science communication, to share papers, to share information. But in the COVID-19 era, WhatsApp and Facebook are the biggest platforms for people who are not involved in science. And
yes,
when the pandemic started, I'm in so many family group chats. I would see, the aunties are sending all of these messages on, you need some eucalyptus oil if you inhale some lemons. And it was so frustrating for me how quickly the misinformation was spreading, and how little, there was very little critical thinking or critical analysis of the messages that were just being sent around. And so I'm wondering, how do you guys work through it, or what should we do as scientists and science communicators to really be at the forefront to fighting in WhatsApp group chats and in on Facebook?
Yes. I think that yes, and even there is a survey recently that shows that social media platforms have been active in spreading misinformation, particularly in Africa. And this survey actually looked at Nigeria, South Africa, and Kenya, and it shows that social media has been active in spreading misinformation. And like you've rightly mentioned, I also came across a lot of this misinformation, well, particularly WhatsApp and Facebook. And there is a huge inequality in the level of access to internet when you look at it in Africa.
Yes.
People at the bottom, a lot of people at the bottom don't have access to the internet. So those people who have access to the internet have access to WhatsApp and Facebook. And this also it still links down to the literacy levels, certain literacy levels. People who are more educated, can be on Twitter, for example. But the general public, it's usually the Facebook and the WhatsApp. And WhatsApp, someone just sends you a message, and all you have to do is just to forward and keep forwarding the message. So what we have been doing so far, we've actually been like I said, we have a community of scientists and journalists. So whenever we have these myths and this misinformation, we have scientists that help to write articles, to debunk this misinformation circulating. But now the limitation is that most of these things, we publish them online, and then we tweet about them, and also share on WhatsApp and on Facebook. So people who don't have access to these platforms automatically don't have access to the right information. So this is one of the major limitations with that. And with the pandemic, everything is moving online. The news is moving online. Even the media landscape is changing. News is moving online, and definitely it has some consequences, and which is the fact that some people cannot have access to the information available. Yeah, so we have been doing that. And even when you look at the story that I wrote recently, I was actually inspired by a viral WhatsApp video that was circulating, telling everybody to use the shea butter.
Oh, yeah.
That it can cure the COVID-19 pandemic. So a scientist, just told me that, the scientist is in Japan, doing his postdoctoral fellowship, and then he told me that, look at what some of my relatives have sent to me. And then I just checked. I went to Instagram. I tried to get to the source of the video, and I found that it was this guy who is a popular social media figure in northern Nigeria, and he was just filmed. He filmed himself and telling people that, no, you see, because he's based in Germany, so it's easier to tell the people here in Nigeria that, this thing is working. So when people watch and say, this guy is based in Germany and he's speaking Hausa, so he was speaking to them.
Yes, so he was more authority.
Yes.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, he's just social media. That's where the critical analysis comes. For example, the people could have asked, who is this guy? Is he a scientist?
Mm-hmm.
Is he a medical practitioner, or is he a health worker? None, and he was known. He's just a musician and a social media figure. So, but people fail to question that.
So we have to engage, I guess, everyone, especially in the arts, who can spread this message. Just make sure we bring them up to speed with what exactly we want them to say.
Yes.
So that they can have a greater reach.
Yes, I think we really have to do that. And as much as possible, we can try as much as possible to make use of platforms like the radio. I think in Africa, radio, it's really effective. It makes a lot of impact because a lot of people listen to the radio.
Yes.
So if we can continue to have these jingles in various African languages, I think it will help. Yes. For Nigeria, I think that is happening. They're using the radios, and you find a lot of jingles on awareness about the coronavirus in various languages, in Hausa, in Igbo, in Yoruba, yes, in Fulani, Fulfulde, so a lot of languages, and that people are really aware of what is happening.
So how do we get involved in the Trends in Africa and Africa Archive and some of these efforts, even as students who are on the continent or African students abroad? How can we get involved with that?
Yeah, for Trend in Africa, I think Trend is always open for volunteers. I don't know if you are interested in something around open hardware.
Yes, I am really passionate about
designing your lab tools yourself.
Oh no. I thought you were talking about open access.
Oh, open access, yes, but the whole open science movement thing.
Yes.
Yes, so Trend is really open to volunteers in a lot of things, and I think including the communication, the science communication aspect. But for Trend is more focused on the open hardware thing. But with regards to Africa Archive, I think Africa Archive is also open to receiving, articles and papers from African scientists anywhere in the world, and particularly with regards to scientific communication. So you can always reach out to them.
Yes. So if you published on Africa Archive, does it also work as a preprint that you put it there, but then you can also submit it to a different journal?
Yeah, you can send that to a different journal.
Okay.
You can put it there in Africa Archive and also send that to a different journal. And for African Science Literacy Network, we're really hoping to expand, and we are looking forward to making more grant applications to see how we can expand on the project by training more of. Last year we trained people from Nigeria. Now, if we have the opportunity and we have the resources, we will train people from around Africa. Yes, train more journalists, train more scientists in science communication as well. And for science communication of Nigeria, you can also reach out anytime you have an article or anything you feel like you want to write about. It could be about the misinformation. Yeah, you can always write to us, and we'll be very happy to publish.
Okay, I had no idea that all of these initiatives were happening, and I guess it's also because it's all started in Nigeria. In Southern Africa, we're still crawling and figuring it out. But I also realize that it's challenging for us to be in contact with other. For me, I was not embedded in academia when I was at home, and it's only now that I'm in graduate school and I'm on Twitter that I'm starting to find a lot more African scientists, whether they're grad students or they are professors or people in the industry. They're so scattered around that it's so difficult to have this one community.
Yes.
So do you guys end up having any conferences with the African Literacy Network?
Yeah. So, like I said, African Science Literacy Network was launched last year.
Yes.
So, I'm really hoping that this will become something big in the future. Like for me, it's something that I've always looked up to, and I've always have this vision of even having a continental publication that science media publication that it's going to have this continental vision, and we're going to report on issues that are Africa focused.
Yes.
And at the same time, you can always have these conferences on science that are also Africa focus. And this is very important because a lot of researchers, for instance, there is this conference, this artificial intelligence conference that was supposed to hold in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, but unfortunately, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's no longer holding. And it's a big blow for the AI industry in Africa because there's always a lot of these conferences happen in Europe or in the US, and African researchers, you have this talented software developers, researchers, scientists that want to attend big conferences, but because of the visa issues, they can't attend,
Yes.
or they don't have the grants.
That's a big deal.
To also attend the conferences. So if we can bring these conferences to Africa, even for example for the journalists, why can't we have the world science journalism conference in Africa?
Yes.
Why can't we have that?
So in terms of paywalls, there's an article that I read a couple of years ago about how sometimes even when countries have sanctions against your country, that you might not be able to access the journals. Do you have any knowledge or experience with this?
Oh no, not really. I've not experienced that.
Okay. And with Africa Archive, do you guys have any stats about whether or not this platform has really improved the visibility of people who have published on Africa Archive and then went on to publish in other journals? Has that really increased? I've seen with bioarchive and chem archive, this has really amplified, those voices in that work. Do you have any increase in citations or collaborations or just more people reading that work because of this Africa Archive?
Yes, I think in terms of collaborations, I think the work of Africa Archive has really helped in kind of facilitating collaborations among scientists in Africa. But trying to measure the impact of the work, Africa Archive was actually established in June 2018.
Oh, that's yeah.
Yes. Personally, I've also asked the question. A lot of the things that we'll do happening online. How can we actually measure? How best can we measure the impact of these things?
Mm-hmm.
Most times, it is difficult trying to measure the impact of these things that happen online. So because I am not working with Africa Archive directly, so I wouldn't know whether, for example, they have conducted some surveys to kind of analyze, to evaluate what they have been doing so far. But once I get this information, I can share with you. I will get in touch with the Africa Archive team to actually know.
I would love to get involved because I've been thinking for so long, how can we make sure that African academics get to publish their work? And I think it's especially important because what I've noticed is that whenever Africans collaborate with people here, they're never really the first author.
Yeah.
And that the author order is actually very important for your career, your mobility. It's currency. And people also are not aware of how important or how much really cool research is being done at home. And I think having a platform like Africa Archive where, that work is showcased and it can also be cited because, with bioarchive and chem archive, you can cite publications. And again, this is, more currency for people to keep moving forward with their careers. And it shouldn't be that people necessarily have to leave the continent or to work in these Western institutions just to have some upward mobility in their career.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask you a couple of lightning round questions. They're the first thing that comes to mind. It doesn't have to be a long answer. So what are you doing in this pandemic that's become part of your routine life?
Yeah, I think with regards to work,
Just anything.
Just anything.
Yes.
Okay. I think these days I've been taking my walk very seriously. Early in the morning, I just take this very long walk and like 45 minutes, and also in the evening. And it really helps me a lot because, as I'm walking, I just get ideas. I just pick up ideas. It could be about a story or about anything.
Yeah.
And it's really been helpful for me. I've been doing that.
Okay.
Yes.
In a perfect post-pandemic world, what's the first thing that you're going to do, or the first place that you're going to go to?
Yeah, honestly, the pandemic has wreaked a lot of havoc to our dreams, and our plans.
Yeah.
It's really tough. It's really tough. But recently, I was telling myself that, look, you just have to keep working, no matter how hopeless the situation is. You just have to keep working. You just have to keep working, and after the pandemic or at the end of the year, so that when you look back, you will be like, oh wow, so despite the pandemic, I've been able to achieve this and that. So in a perfect post-pandemic world, I just feel like flying. I just want to fly out.
Someone else said that the other day that they didn't realize how much of a privilege being able to get on a plane and go somewhere else.
Yes. I really want to fly out. Maybe just go to Accra, not somewhere in
Just
Africa.
next door.
Yes.
And then last question is, what has come out of the pandemic that you hope that will keep forever?
Oh, yeah, I think that hygiene is very important. The hand washing, it's critical because yes, a lot of research have shown that proper hand washing can take care of a lot of diseases around. So it means that if we can continue to wash our hands and observe good hygiene, then we're going to be healthy. We're going to have a healthier society. And at the same time, also, I think the world came together and for the first time to agree on a lot of issues, including the pandemic and what has happened in the US, Black Lives, the police brutality, and the world came together to fight against these injustices. So I really wish that the world can actually continue in this way, that people can come together whenever there is an injustice around the world, anywhere in the world, people can come together and fight against any oppression or injustice that is happening anywhere. And at the same time, for me personally, one of the major takeaways for me has been that really one needs to be conscious about deaths, and people have died a lot. So personally, I lost 2 people in the family. So
Sorry.
and it's been a lot of I've had a lot of time, thinking about myself, thinking about life and what I want to do thereafter. But I mean, all these things will definitely happen. It's life. Yes.
Well, Abdullahi, thank you so much for joining us on our platform. This was very informative, and I really enjoyed our conversation. So where can people find you, your email, and on social media?
Yes, my email is Abdullahi Tsanni at gmail.com. There is no space. It just goes Abdullahi Tsanni at gmail.com. And on Twitter, I am at Abdul Tsanni. So you can always find me on Twitter. And I'm also very, very happy to have this conversation with you. and even to hear about your work and what you've been doing. And I was happy when you told me that you're from Zimbabwe, and sometimes, you read some things about Zimbabwe, about the poverty, a lot of things happening. We have this. I used to think that we have these similar problems even in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
The poverty is very high, but it's for me. I always feel very happy and hopeful when I see people from Africa doing great things. It gives me a lot of joy and hope for the continent, particularly when I see young people like us doing all of these things. Because sometimes you just feel so hopeless that, oh no, the future is hopeless. But when you are within this community of people, you feel great and want to do more to make the continent better.